Welcome to the Chris Levels Show, Politics and Prophecy. For the next hour, he will share with you his theme of living life based on principles and not feelings. It's time for a return to our Judeo-Christian roots of laws and repent from the progressive liberal philosophy of what's convenient and feels good at the moment. Join him as he uncovers and exposes the spiritual wickedness that is robbing us of our inheritance that Jesus Christ promised us as a nation if we are obedient to his ways. Here's the host of the show, Chris Levels.
So we're going to start out today. The book that I have been reading from is The Marketing of Evil. It's how radicals, elitists, and pseudo-experts sell us corruption disguised as freedom. And also I'm going to be sharing some articles today with you concerning what's going on in terms of vote for marriage. You're on a hit list, and this has to do with sharing your information with gay rights groups that want to harass you if you vote against them. The homosexual editorial puts First Amendment on trial, talking about how they operate in schools to indoctrinate your children and try to turn them towards their lifestyle, and just a full wave of corruption that is part of the gay rights movement, or as I call it, the sodomite movement. So I'm hoping that you will enjoy the show, that it will be very informative for you, and that you will be educated, informed at the same time. Now yesterday, I left off with two men named Marshall Kirk and Hunter Madsen that had written a book called After the Ball, How America Will Conquer Its Fear and Hatred of Gays in the 90s. And I'm going to go ahead and reacquaint you with these two gentlemen and what their role was in actually taking the movement off the streets and into the media and into education as well as the courts. And again, we start off with, in February 1988, some 175 leading activists representing homosexual groups from across the nation held a war conference in Warrenton, Virginia, to map out their movement's future. Shortly thereafter, activists Marshall Kirk and Hunter Madsen put into book form the comprehensive public relations plan they had been advocating with their gay rights peers for several years. Kirk and Madsen were not the kind of drooling activists that would burst into churches and throw condoms in the air. They were smart guys, very smart. Kirk, a Harvard-educated researcher in neuropsychiatry, worked with the Johns Hopkins study of mathematically precocious youth and designed aptitude tests for adults with 200-plus IQs. Madsen, with a doctorate in politics from Harvard, was an expert on public persuasion tactics and social marketing. Together, they wrote After the Ball, How America Will Conquer Its Fear and Hatred of Gays in the 90s. Now, they had three ways of doing this, and it was called desensitizing, jamming, and conversion. Desensitization is described as inundating the public in a continuous flood of gay-related advertising, presented in the least offensive fashion possible. If straights can't shut off the shower, they may at least eventually get used to being wet. But the activists did not mean advertising in the usual marketing context, but rather quite a different approach. The main thing is to talk about gayness until the issue becomes thoroughly tiresome. They add, seek desensitization and nothing more. If you can get straights to think homosexuality is just another thing meriting no more than a shrug of the shoulders, then your battle for legal and social rights is virtually won. This planned hegemony is a variant of the type that Michael Warren describes in Seeing Through the Media, where it is not raw, overt coercion. It is one group's covert orchestration of compliance by another group through structuring the consciousness of the second group. Structuring the consciousness of others? If that phraseology is uncomfortably reminiscent of various mind control and brainwashing tales you might have heard over the years, don't be surprised. Manipulating the emotions and thereby restructuring the thoughts and beliefs of large numbers of people is what modern marketing is all about. Jamming is psychological terrorism meant to silence expression of or even support for dissenting opinion. Radio counselor and psychologist Dr. Laura Schlesinger experienced big-time jamming during the run-up to her planned television show. Outraged over a single comment critical of homosexuals she had made on her radio program, activists launched a massive intimidation campaign against the television program advertisers. As a result, the new show was stillborn. But perhaps the highest profile example of jamming occurred after the 1998 murder of University of Wyoming freshman Matthew Shepard. Lured from a bar, robbed, and savagely beaten by two men, Shepard died 5 days later of head injuries. In the frenzied saturation media coverage that followed, the press and homosexual activists singled out conservative Christians as having created a climate of anti-gay hate in which such a brutal act could happen. NBC's Today Show took the lead, focusing on a Christian ad campaign running at the time that offered to help homosexuals change their orientation. Reporter David Gregory narrated, "The ads were controversial for portraying gays and lesbians as sinners who had made poor choices, despite the growing belief that homosexuality may be genetic. Have the ads fostered a climate of anti-gay hate that leads to incidents like the killing of Matthew Shepard? Gay rights activists say the ads convey a message that gay people are defective." And in a now infamous interview, Today's Katie Couric asked Wyoming Governor Jim Geringer, "Some gay rights activists have said that some conservative political organization like the Christian Coalition, the Family Research Council, and Focus on the Family are contributing to this anti-homosexual atmosphere by having an ad campaign saying if you are a homosexual, you can change your orientation. That prompts people to say, if I meet someone who's homosexual, I'm going to take action to try to convince them or try to harm them. Do you believe that such groups are contributing to this climate?" Consciously or not, the media were following Kirk and Madsen's playbook to the letter, discrediting anyone who disagreed with the homosexual agenda by associating them with low-life murderers. In reality, none of the Christian groups smeared by NBC had ever condoned mistreatment of homosexuals. In fact, they had explicitly condemned it. As if to add even more shame to the whole hog jamming of Christians after the Shepard murder, in 2004, a comprehensive new investigation by ABC News 2020 concluded that homosexuality very likely wasn't a factor in Shepard's murder, but rather Shepard had been targeted for his money. So much for desensitization and jamming, but what about conversion? Here, Kirk and Madsen announced defiantly, "We mean conversion of the average American's emotions, mind, and will through a planned psychological attack in the form of propaganda fed to the nation via the media. We mean subverting the mechanism of prejudice to our own ends, using the very processes that made America hate us to turn their hatred into warm regard, whether they like it or not. Transforming another person's hatred into love, warm regard, is the object of classic brainwashing. As Kirk and Madsen explain, in conversion, we mimic the natural process of stereotype learning with the following effect. We take the bigot's good feelings about all right guys and attach them to the label gay, either weakening or eventually replacing his bad feelings toward the label and the prior stereotype. Whereas in jamming, the target is shown a bigot being rejected by his crowd for his prejudice against gays, in conversion, the target is shown his crowd actually associating with gays in good fellowship. Once again, it's very difficult for the average person who by nature and training almost invariably feels what he sees his fellows feeling, not to respond in this knee-jerk fashion to sufficiently calculated advertisement. We're talking about some serious messing around with Americans' minds here. Do the homosexual activists thus engaged really know they're deceiving the public, or are they convinced they're just telling the truth? It makes no difference that the ads are lies, writes Kirk and Madsen, not to us, because we're using them to ethically good effect to counter negative stereotypes that are every bit as much lies and far more wicked ones. So there you have, in terms of the conversion and the types of methods that the sodomite movement uses in order to influence public opinion. Yesterday, I also shared with you how the media was used and how many of the media, in terms of the organizations that take part in also proposing the homosexual agenda, And I was quite surprised when I first read that Fox News was part of this, but indeed they are, as well as people like the Dallas Morning News, the Los Angeles Times, the New York Daily News, San Francisco Chronicle, Time Incorporated, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post. They are a part of trying to get you to accept what God says is an abomination and in what in nature cannot reproduce at all either. The next thing we're going to talk about here, which we have a little time, is what the successes of the homosexual movement and how they use their agenda to move forward